we've got people right there. Is that a homeowner that's trying to leave? Is this your house?
Yeah.
Which is your house?
Yeah, this is our house. Backyard's on fire. I'm out of here.
Oh my gosh. So what happened? Is there anything we can do to help you, sir?
You can take these paintings, I guess.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chakras and Cusswords podcast. My name is Catherine, and I am your host. Today, we will be diving into the energy of fire, the energy of destruction, and the movement of chaos that fire and sometimes the element of the planet Mars can bring. We will be looking at two fires, two very controversial fires. The recent Los Angeles fire in California that occurred in the first week of January of 2025, and also the Lahaina fire of Maui. I will tell you that this has been a topic that I have wanted to talk about for a while, especially about Maui. And then after the recent fire occurred, I decided to stop holding my tongue and begin to express what it was that I was seeing and also what it was that I was feeling. I will tell you that both of these fires do have an eerie similarity to them that I first noticed when I first read and even began to learn about the Maui fire, and then seeing the LA fire take place almost felt like an energetic deja vu. I will say that when we are looking at the element of fire and looking at the element of Mars and the energy of the sun, there's a lot of controversial topics that come up. This might be a trigger warning for some people. If you don't want to hear about some of the controversies or conspiracies, please decide to stop this podcast. But we will be getting into a lot of them. And I will say that my heart is broken for both of these states. Of course, for California, for I am a Californian native, and also because it recently has been a tragedy that is still unfolding. Let's look at the energy of Mars. Mars is seen as the Red Warrior. It's also seen as a comic energy of cosmos. There's an energy of blaze that runs through the heavens of the celestial bodies that brings mass destruction and raw underlining power, strength, and destruction. This planet is often called the Lesser Malefic. It is seen as somewhat of a nuisance, a chaotic energy. It harbors chaos, enjoys chaos. It enjoys violence and mass destruction. It is the spark that initiates the transformation. It is the energy of the phoenix before the ashes have fallen, creating the energy of movement, of a renewal. And sometimes when we are going through this tunnel of obstacles and horrific movement, it almost feels utterly unlivable. It is a battlefield of shadows, heat, exhaustion, and even an energy of death. The energy of temper, excitement, and spontaneous movement that creates mass and sometimes single destruction. This energy takes a movement to the element of fire. Fire is seen and also believed to be much more than just a weapon. It could even be a healer. It can even be something that allows growth. The energy of fire and the element of Mars, fire, and the sun tend to do a parallel, a dance of synchronicity together. It's clearing away the new movement of the life and the rise from the death, the ashes. Its flames represent a primal force, the force within us, that many of us don't often see. It is the area of courage. It is the energy of desire and passions, yet to pursue our dreams or to even just survive at our most primal instinct. There is a velocity of confront that occurs, which it allows us to let go of energies that no longer serve us. Yet Mars sometimes will warn us that there is conflict brewing, as we can see the energy or temper of flame within another individual or feel it within our own. It is the energy that creates, and it is the energy that moves. The destruction that Mars often dances to is not one that many would like to dance with. It has sometimes no purpose, no meaningful action, but destruction, but chaos, but the energy of the cycle of the natural circle of life. Whatever's once here might sometimes need to be destroyed, and so on, as the pattern and the circle aligns. With every tower that comes crashing down from Mount Mars, from the energy and the element of fire, is a number, a symbol, and a movement of a rhythm that sometimes almost feels like an ending, but really it is a step to a new beginning. The energy of war and being the energy of the gods' wars often feels a little bit like a vitality that many of us do not even want to conquer. It is the flames that are divin and divided between us. The energy of anger continues to arise, especially when then there is mass conflict. Mars sometimes whispers to us to face it all, to see the destruction, to give way at the end of the tunnel. And though some might be rebuilding everything that Mars has destroyed, it is something that we cannot ignore, and it is something that we cannot not acknowledge. That the energy of destruction often lives within the energy of life. When I first heard about the fires in Los Angeles, something in me didn't sit right. I saw how big the fires were growing, but there was just a part of me where it didn't really make any sense. I mean, Los Angeles is a very, very big populated city, especially the Palisades energy and area of atmosphere is pretty populated. But Los Angeles as a whole, and so is California as a whole, a very populated state. And it's almost like a very dense and almost very crowded state, right? Our population is probably, I don't know, within a couple million, if not more. I know in the small town that I live in, if you even call it a town or a city, we have over almost 100,000 people. And we're not even considered like a city. We're a small area of California. And we are accustomed, as a native California, I can say we are accustomed to wildfires. We know that there's wildfires. Wildfires occur kind of frequently. We've had issues with water. Our issues with water and drought has been increasing, especially with climate change. The fact is, it doesn't rain. Rarely does it rain in California, especially in the Valley and Los Angeles, and of course, more down south. We'll be lucky if we get out of a drought. We're always in and out of a drought. So fire is something that many of us are concerned about. As a Californian, I can say that fire is definitely something that I have seen multiple summers, smokeways on the highways, I remember when I was traveling from nursing school, they had a huge fire out here, and I had to drive through the freeway to my home. There was an evacuation because it was all like field area, but just seeing the flames on the mountain tops is very alarming. And since California doesn't have water, we are very dry, and so are the mountaintops and the grass and the area of dead leaves on the ground. It is a very dry state. We're not a state that's known for having a lot of moisture. So usually we see the fires around the summer or maybe even sometimes late spring. So I thought it was kind of peculiar that there was a fire in January. That didn't really make too much sense to me. And I was very alarmed that the fire wasn't able to get contained quickly. And then just as the story continued to break, it just didn't really seem to make any sense. But I will say that the wind is apparently moving very fast the day of the fire, which where I live, I could see how that could happen because it is very windy where I live as well. So it makes sense that the wind carried the fire. So what we know about the first fire, the fire in January of 2025, it was a series of fires that took place in the Los Angeles area, causing significant destruction and loss of lives. I believe now it's up to 16 have lost their lives due to the fire. The Palisades fire initiated in Pacific Palisades, rapidly becoming one of the most destructive wildfires in the Los Angeles County's history. By January 8th, it burned down nearly 12,000 acres and destroyed over 1,000 structures, leading to evacuation of tens of thousands of residents. This was on January 7th that the fire actually occurred. The actual first fire has not been really disclosed of what they think it is. The Eaton fire began near the area of Pasadena, consuming approximately 14,000 acres, resulting in 5 fatalities. By January 8th, the Sunset Fire started in the Hollywood Hills near Runyon Canyon Park, prompting evacuation orders for tens of thousands of people. By January 9th, they had the Lydia fires, Woodley fires, and by January 9th, they also had fires erupting in the Los Angeles area, known as the Kenneth fires. So like I said, there's multiple fires. The fires, along with others, contribute with over 10,000 structures being lost and now up to 7 fatalities. Then last, we had the January 10th, the initiation of the Archer fire began to take place, and it was reported in the Granada Hills of Los Angeles. Firefighters managed to stop its forward progress after about 19 acres. There was mandatory evacuations around January 11th and 2025. I will say when I was looking at the birth chart of just the US in whole and looking at some of the things that were taking place during the fires, astrologically speaking, we had the energy of a Aries moon. We also had Mars in Cancer retrograde, and the Aries moon makes me think of like something that's a little bit emotional and spontaneous and also energetic around that fire element. But I will say, being in the year of 9, which is known as the year of Mars, and also being surrounded by the energy of just so much excitement, so much destruction, so much flamboyant and almost combustion type energy really is concerning. And it was something that I was talking about in the astrology dates when I was talking about the North and the South Node. That the North Node at the time was in Aries, and so the South Node was in Libra, which was the energy of justice. And I was saying, can you imagine if we had a year of 9, the Mars year, and also there was a North Node in Aries and also a South Node in Libra? And I was saying how fortunate that we are that the North Node was switching over to Pisces and the South Node was switching over to Virgo. But unfortunately, it felt like the switch didn't happen quick enough. In the meantime, we had the energetic fires take place, the energetic alignment of destruction of not just Los Angeles having a huge Aries stellium, but also the energy of the year of 9 and 1 being a very dominant number, representation of January. And I feel like from the moment we stepped into 2025, it's been a lot of chaos. It's been a lot of energy that has been feeling very intense. Another thing that I want to talk about is climate change is occurring. I know so many people believe that this probably wasn't due to climate change, which I agree with. I think there was probably some arson that took place. And I also feel like there's just so much poor infrastructure in California. But climate change is the thing that is affecting the reason why we're so dry in California, why we're always in a drought, why we're always not receiving water from the rainfalls, why the state is always having wildfires. There's a lot of acknowledgement that this could possibly have been an arson attempt. I'm not sure if the initial fire was one, but there's been speculations that there have been suspects that have been arrested. And I think some of that also has to do with the energy of movement of people are just so disconnected with the energy of humanity. And we kind of see this how the fires portrayed. There's a lot of people on social media who are saying they're rich. All those homes that burned down were multi-million-dollar homes. And it's almost like they're using that as a scapegoat so they don't have to face their emotions of what occurred. Regardless who has lost their home, if they are a celebrity or if they are a worker, working class individual, somebody who gets up, goes to work, who supports their family, regardless who it is, it's still a human being. And I think somewhere in the timeline, the shift with the collective has just become so exhausted that our loss of empathy is starting to kind of become dismantled. Could it be because we are in the year of 9? No, because many of us have been feeling that way, right? That we have been exhausted by the work, less gratitude that we receive, by the overall energy of never being able to quite make ends meet. And then when we see these celebrities or these people lose their homes, that's very hard for us to be sympathetic. Another thing that I heard about these fires was that the insurance company previously has taken fire insurance off of their packages, off of their claims, right? Off of a lot of their contracts. So a lot of these homes no longer had fire insurance. So that means that a lot of these people won't be getting their homes rebuilt through the insurance companies. They'll be paying for it either by donations or by coming out of their pocket or selling the land, which is something that I'm wondering, how are they going to rebuild because of the mass amount of neighborhoods that were basically burned to the ground. How are they going to be able to rebuild? I'm sure there's going to be some corporate giants going in there trying to get people to sell. Maybe somebody is going to try to revision that landscape. I don't really know. All we can do is speculate, but I definitely feel like there is something that is kind of brewing, as one might say, in the minds of, if it is the government or if it is the elites or if it is corporations. For them, I honestly think that they are going to try to move everybody to more of like a suburban area, unless you are very, very wealthy. Then maybe you might be able to purchase a home somewhere in the new area of the Palisades. But I honestly think that they are going to try to remove a lot of the population that has already been there. And I'm not saying that these fires are intentional by this, population or by these people or by these circumstances. I'm just saying that when something like this happens, there's always people who, in some ways, take advantage. We have to remember that a lot of this population who were affected, that most of them were literally just like either really, really rich or they were really, really struggling. The medium is there, but most of it is kind of more of working class population. It's not the really, really rich that have lost their homes. While many Hollywood celebrities have been affected, we have to remember that there are so many people who are displaced. The celebrities, for the most part, I think will be fine. And I think that's why the collective is so upset, is because you have celebrities saying donate, 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 and sharing organizations to donate. And they're literally multi-millionaires or often even billionaires. So there is definitely a disassociation when you have that much money that you don't really see the challenges. If anything, celebrities should be donating and helping rebuild, but instead they're trying to influence the population to donate, donate, donate. And a lot of the population a lot of the collective is donating. And I think that's beautiful. I've donated. I plan on donating more. But I think that when people are seeing these celebrities in these multi-million-dollar mansions asking for donations, there's that disconnect that kind of comes from the collective, especially from the collective who they don't necessarily know California and the way that California's infrastructure is. So one of the reasons why there was such devastation was definitely because of the winds. And then we see that air element coming away, that air energy of the Aquarius, as we have Aquarius being aligned with Pluto, which was squaring I believe it was squaring and opposing the moon of the Aries moon during the time of the fire. And also, it was creating an energy of disassociation, as we also had that energy of the Capricorn sun. So we see that the winds were taking place, and also that there was this huge drying effect that our state has been going through. The drought conditions are prolonged, and we do have a water shortage. A lot of the firefighters, which this kind of rang very similar to Maui, as a lot of the firefighters said that when they would go to the tanks or the fire hydrants, that there was no water. No water in the fire hydrants. It doesn't make sense to me. These are one of the most taxed and wealthiest neighborhoods, and they don't have water in the fire hydrants. And could it be because we are in a drought, or we were in a drought? But it doesn't make sense that there's no water in the fire hydrants. Another thing that they had to do was actually get fire eliminated through using water from the ocean, because California had no water. I often think that, and this was something that my mother used to tell me, and I remember she used to tell me this before I even had children. Like when I was in my teens, she would always tell me, be resourceful with your water, be mindful with your water, because one day we are going to have wars over water. Water is a necessity, and water is also a right. Everybody should have clean drinking water, but so many countries do not. And water is something that we will be fighting for in years to come. So my mom was, I wouldn't say she was a psychic. She's just a crazy Italian lady. But she definitely was very intuitive, and she definitely had a strong energy that would surround her, where she would talk about a lot of controversial topics. And now I kind of understand what she's talking about. And I do think that we will have a war over water. There's been a lot of talk about the Risen family, who is the family that owns apparently 60% of California's drinking water. They're a huge family, corporative family, an agricultural family, and they have many businesses, and somehow they were able to privately invest in owning California's water share. And they own the companies such as the Pomegranate Juice Company, the Pistachio Company, and more. So that was definitely a hot topic that was going around. It makes you wonder, how can one individual family own the whole, more than the whole state's populated water that is supposed to be used in time of need, right? Drinking water, and just so people have resources of water. And as we can see, that somehow California is basically selling the water and creating contracts with individual elitism families to own half of the state's drinking water. Another thing that really took place with the fires was human activity. So the way that we are built as humans is to panic. And in all honesty, it's a normal action. It's a normal intention. It's sometimes something that we can't control, right? And since there was very huge energy of panic, there was a lot of obstacles. They said people were driving and then they got paranoid or something happened, they got stuck and they left their cars, took the keys from their cars, which basically made it where other people weren't able to get out when it was time to evacuate. The infrastructure, we have to remember that California has all these old power lines, huge old power lines, especially in the older areas and neighborhoods. And when those things fall, they let off electricity, which I am sure contribute to more error, more fires, and more energy of the fire growing and growing. We also had limited resources such as grounded aircraft. So since there was strong winds, it often made it very unsafe for the firefighting planes to actually operate. And same with the helicopters, which delayed the containment efforts of the fire. There was the energy of the mass evacuations. It's very hard to get so many people out of that area. And it led to a lot of difficulties for the emergency responders and often delays. So we have to remember that there's some elements of fire that we just cannot change. The energy of the weather patterns, the energy of the whirls, and the erratic wind shifts which spread. There's a lot of conspiracies that are going on right now, and I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist, but I do definitely listen to a few because sometimes, you always wonder where that conspiracy came from. So there's claims that some of the conspiracies argue that these wildfires were intentionally started using some type of high, techno weapon, such as a laser or a deployed aircraft or something like that. And there's, of course, a lot of viral pictures. And there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence and the preservation of energy and the area of scientific explanation of, heat and wildfires doesn't necessarily take traction or take sense because there's photos of the California wildfire showing particular burn patterns and certain areas. But of course, a lot of these are saying that this is unnatural, which I do think there is some unnatural elements to what has occurred, but also the energy of, could somebody be pulling a fast one on us? Can they be trying to steal the land, trying to steal the properties, the land? So there's a lot of claims that fires are intentionally set by governments or corporations. I even heard real estate agents to get infrastructure projects and also to create and change the infrastructure of certain layouts and the residents. The allegations have suggested that the fires are near valuable real estate because they want luxury developments, transportation projects, and such things as high-speed railroad systems or some type of high-speed transportation system. There's also areas where they feel like it just doesn't make sense that such a big fire was not able to contain. I will say that firefighters are not going to stop. Like, nobody's going to say, like, stop, don't put out that fire. And the firefighters are going to be like, okay, firefighters fight fires. That's what they do. They're not going to stop, right? But I do think it's very odd that so much of this fire was not able to get contained. And I think it had to do with the lack of water. And I don't know why we had dry hydrants, just like Lahaina had dry hydrants, especially when we had such a tragedy that occurred literally not too long ago. a lot of people, don't want to believe that wildfires are caused by climate change because, they don't want to acknowledge that climate change is real. Unfortunately, climate change is very real. The motive of if it could be, going green is too expensive, I don't know, but a lot of people are in denial of how climate change is occurring. And there is evidence that there are worsening fires and that there are worsening dry conditions than what we have been used to in the past. There's also the speculation that arson was occurring, and it has been acknowledged that there's been, I believe, two suspects. I believe those two homeless individuals. I believe, I'm just saying this is all alleged because I haven't actually seen anything in writing saying that they were creating arson, but it's alleged that there's some arson going on. And the fire chiefs and the investigators say they will give us updates, more to come. But during previous wild events and wildfires, social media has always said that they have believed that it's more because of arson than actual climate change. And yes, there are definitely some fires where it was arson instead of the poles falling. But we also have to remember that the conditions that we were in with the lack of resources also have to be acknowledged as well. Some people are saying that's the aliens coming to wipe us out. And then this is the one that I would say I've been hearing the most of when we talk about conspiracies. It is the Great Reset, the energy of Hollywood dying and them basically starting all over. I will say that I think that Hollywood will not be able to repair. I often think that Hollywood doesn't want to repair of what it once was in the state of California. I think Hollywood is dying, and that's why many of us are seeing this disconnect where none of us really care, unfortunately, too much about the celebrities who lost their homes. And that seems like all the media is playing, the celebrities who lost their homes. I understand they lost their homes and I feel bad, but I'm more worried about the modern day working family who don't have money to just relocate and have been basically scammed out of their insurance. That's who I'm worried about. Also, there's claims that wealthy individuals or companies are allegedly destroying properties intentionally to collect insurance payouts. So, like I said, the conspiracies are way, way, way crazy when it comes to the fires. We have to remember that this is a very emotionally intense moon that we're currently going through on January 13th, which is literally just a few days from when the fires occurred, that our areas of vulnerability and collective empathy might be having some energy that feels almost subdued. And it might be because it's just so much communication, so much media about it, that this energy of destruction, the energy of feeling safe, the energy of movement is really feeling kind of at a all-time high. And then we also have the Pluto in Aquarius that is occurring, and a lot of us might be feeling Like this is the break of a new chapter. This is a break of a new social economic structure. I will say with Pluto and Aquarius, this is a time that we are more centered around humanity and more centered around the individual collective, the collective of community, the collective of helping each other. And I feel like there is somewhat of a disconnect that we've been seeing. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the population being exhausted from working, and just prices going up, and that energy of not ever feeling like you're able to maintain. And then when we see stuff like this whole energy feels like it's just collapsing within us, collapsing around us, because we've all worked so hard to maintain what it is that we have. And to see something like this occur, it lets us know that we are very much centered and also vulnerable to the mercies of not just Mother Nature, but the mercies of unknowing circumstances. And a lot of us feel like this area of contemplation, this area of disconnect, disassociation, and this energy where either we're crying out our emotions or we are angry. I've also been seeing the collective getting very angry with each other, which I'm not a fan of. And especially in the quote unquote spiritual community. You know, if you're not doing this, if you're not sharing about this, if you're not doing that, if you're talking about this and not this, and blah, 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 you know, so many opinions about what others are doing. We have to remember that sometimes while the situation is affecting us, it might not necessarily be affecting the whole collective, and it's only affecting an inner community or inner collective. So we should not put shame on other people or judge other people. That's not necessarily what the collective needs when chaos and crisis occurs. So the mass destruction and the energy of influence of rebirth, definitely there with the Pluto and Aquarius, the energy of air, traveling the fires through each neighborhood one at a time, the energy of rebuilding communities and infrastructure as we see Uranus and Taurus, the climate of karma, the combination of Uranus and Taurus, Saturn and Pisces may represent humanity's removing and also reinventing and charging for new stances with environmental issues and climate change. I think it is a time for the collective to heal, and hopefully the full moon in Cancer, the energy of the feminine and the mother, Saturn in Pisces, the energy of responsibilities and boundaries, being enthusiasted through our own conscious state, as we do have the nodes now shifted, thank goodness, to the energy of the North Node in Pisces. Hopefully will give us a little bit more of a consciousness of awareness, the emphasis of the emotional and the collective recovery after trauma. People do different things in trauma. People do grieve differently. People do worry about certain situations differently. And I think that is what we need to remember, instead of yelling at each other, trying to shame each other for the way that others tend to acknowledge certain situations. By understanding this, that transformation and growth and rejuvenation comes with peace and humanity and empathy for all, not just the ones that we can resonate with, is part of the human process. I will say when I heard about these fires, it did remind me of Lahaina. So the Maui fires occurred of August of 2023 among one of the deadliest and most devastating wildfires in Hawaii's history, centered in primarily in historic town of Lahaina. And I love Maui. I don't know if all of you guys know, but Maui is definitely holds, just like Los Angeles holds a little piece of my heart, so does Maui. I was married in Maui. We often, when we do go to Hawaii, we go to Maui. And Maui has this just beautiful element about it. It has that energy of the heart chakra. It has that energy of movement that just feels beautiful. So Maui's western coast, the fires resulted in extensive loss of life, property destruction, and cultural heritage. And it occurred on August 8th. I remember I was like 8/8. Wow. Ooh. I mean, I just remember the date when it occurred. It was like right in, I believe, Leo season. I was like, oh my goodness. And the fires initiated in multiple areas across Maui, including Lahaina, Kula, Olinda, and it had a lot of strong winds. Again, that energy of the air element and the fire element. And the strong winds were from Hurricane Dora that was passing hundreds of miles south of Hawaii. It had intense flames and it caused them to spread rapidly. That was another thing, is both of these fires felt like they spreaded very, very, very rapid, very rapid. Lahaina's devastation of fire quickly engulfed the town of Lahaina, and evacuation was set to mostly be done on foot. People did attempt to leave through their car, but I've heard a lot of mixed stories that people weren't able to get out from their cars, driving, whatever reason. Roads were blocked, things occurred. It just had a lot of almost like controversy on why the evacuations were so hard. And many people ended up jumping in the ocean. And when they jumped in the ocean, they literally were watching Lahaina burn down. Very sad, very tragic. And some of their last resorts were jumping into the ocean, running towards the water, because they honestly felt like they had nowhere to run. They had nowhere to go. And the state of emergency occurred because the Hawaii governor, Josh Green, declared a state of emergency with the help of President Biden, who approved federal aid to assist with the recovery efforts. But there's been a lot of talk about Maui. The areas of, I guess you could say, gentrification. And it is, it is definitely a hard area to live in. It's very expensive. I don't know why they don't grow a lot of their own things, but everything is imported. They're on this little island and it's just very hard to survive in Maui. And a lot of natives to Maui, a lot of the indigenous population of Maui, a lot of the family generations have moved from Maui, and especially after results from the fire. I remember when we went to Maui last year in September, I was like, I feel like everybody here is white. And I know it was like, where are the natives? That's kind of how I felt, in all honesty. And it just felt like a lot has changed. I mean, we did see natives, but To me, I felt like the mass majority of the population was Caucasian. So I do feel like the price of living is so high, and it has driven a lot of the native population out. And then the fact with the fires, it's almost made it unbearable for them to live. When the devastation occurred in Maui from the fires, at least 97 people were confirmed dead, with dozens more injured and over 30 people still accounted for from my latest reports. Many residents were trapped in their vehicles and in their homes due to the rapid spread of fires that they weren't able to get out. Survivors faced emotional, psychological, and almost a huge detriment, right? Entire families were affected, entire neighborhoods were affected. The property loss and cultural loss, over 22,000 buildings destroyed. And most of them were residential, so these weren't like corporations. Lahaina once was the capital of the Hawaiian kingdom, and the historic cultural site was nearly wiped out, including a lot of their landmarks. The banyan tree and local businesses that were very popular in the historic history of Maui. Damages were estimated to bypass over $5.5 billion. And there was a lot of environmental damages. Thousands of acres of land were scorned. The native floral and fauna suffered extensive harm, disrupting Maui's unique ecosystem. Maui's very humid. It feels like a rainforest. It feels very moist. So it's not dry like California. It's not freezing like the California coast, but it has its own. Maui, in all honesty, I feel like Maui's just a beautiful heaven. It's a beautiful area. It's just gorgeous. The thousands of residents and families were displaced. Many left homeless, and relief shelters and community efforts provided temporary refuge for these people. But even when my husband and I went to Maui, we saw people were still living on the beach. I don't know if it was a result from the fire or if it was just the homeless population increasing in Maui. But their contributing factors were very similar to ours here in California. Strong winds. The winds were excessive, up to 60 miles per hour, making it hard for the firefighters to use some type of helicopters or planes or aircraft to extinguish the fires. The drought conditions. Maui has been actually experiencing a drought, and a lot of that has to do with climate change, climate control. The severe drought, leaving the vegetation very, very flammable. So Maui, I remember when we first went to Maui, when we first got married, that was back in 1999. I would say it was definitely raining, or it had some type of sprinkle, at least once or twice at the trip. I didn't see I don't think it rained at all when we were here the last time. And we went kind of around the same season, and it was definitely different. Climate change has increased frequency, and the intensity of droughts are occurring in the places that used to be almost seen as rainforests. You can't be a rainforest if you don't have any rain. So there's definitely been a lot of talk of how climate changing may not have been the start of these fires, but they're definitely one of the reasons why these fires continue to grow. There's also a lot of non-native grasses that are in Maui and in the agriculture, which are traditionally not in Maui, but they've kind of been transplanted over there. And these species of grasses in agriculture tend to burn very quick, more quick than what Maui's natural grasses or areas of grass would. And they believe that also helps spread the fires. and there was a delay emergency response. For whatever reason, the warning systems were issued with Maui. The emergency sirens that were usually designed for tsunamis and other disasters were not activated, which left many of the residents unaware of the danger of the fire. So it was definitely a lack of preparedness. I would say lack of preparedness in both states. And Hawaii has been limited to experience with large-scale wildfires. Like I said, wildfires are very uncommon for Maui because usually they are a rainforest. Luckily for Maui's system in recovery, they've had local heroes be acknowledged. Residents use their personal boats and vehicles to rescue each other and also to provide supplies. The communities quickly mobilized to provide food, shelter, and aid displaced families. Federal and state, FEMA, and other agencies provided financial and logistical support, including emergency housing and disaster relief funding. Hawaii's government faced so much criticism, rightfully so, just like our government should face huge criticism. The cultural and environmental restoration and efforts are still taking place in Maui. So during this time with Maui, there was the energy that fueled almost similar but different. I believe at this time Pluto was in Capricorn. There was a collective reckoning, which was almost like a power structure of responsibilities and transformations, with his energy destroying the historic town. A lot of conspiracies with Maui as well. If they were fires that were started intentionally, the cause of the fire, the reasoning behind their hydrants being dry. People supposedly were trying to turn on water and there was no water. So a lot of the same similar problems. I have heard a lot of the area of conspiracy where people talk about they want to build, smart cities, that they wanted to build a smart city in Lahaina, and that was something that didn't take place because the Maui population and community voted no because Lahaina was seen as a historic town. And some people believe that somehow this fire was caused so a smart city could take place. That's very sick. It's very sad what has happened, and to hear stories like this, it's just heartbreaking. So when we look at some of the area of stolen land and the area of land being stolen,
accused of knowing about the plot, Liliuokalani was brought to the palace where she would be held to await trial.
The trial itself will take place in the throne room. She is no longer Queen Liliuokalani. She is Mrs. Lydia Dominus, a common citizen, a traitor, a person who has attempted to bring the law into her own hands as she had done before.
She wrote, "The only charge against me really was that of being a queen. The object was evidently to humiliate me, to make me break down in the presence of the staring crowd. But in this, they were disappointed." Liliuokalani was sentenced to 5 years of hard labor and fined $5,000. Neither was ever. In 1898, when the Spanish-American War broke out, American troops headed to the Philippines. President McKinley recognized the strategic value of Hawaii and supported a congressional resolution for annexation. On August 12, 1898, in a grand ceremony, President Dole formally yielded the sovereignty and public property of the Hawaiian Islands to the United States. The Stars and Stripes was slowly raised over Iolani Palace, and the Hawaiian flag was brought down for the last time. But few Hawaiians would witness the ceremony. Most spent the day at home, behind closed blinds.
On the actual day of annexation, the Queen shuttered herself at Washington Place, surrounded by her court, by the princes, by her ladies-in-waiting, and they had a solemn picture taken. On the other side at Iolani Palace, there were sharpshooters pointed out. There was still tension in the air that something might happen, but when the Hawaiian flag was lowered, it was said that it was cut into small little 2 to 3 inch ribbons and given out as tokens of remembrance to the sons and daughters of the missionary families, so that they could keep those as little tokens of their great victory over the Hawaiian kingdom and the end of the tyranny of the Hawaiian monarchy.
Liliuokalani would live for another 20 years as an American citizen in the United States territory of Hawaii. By the time of her death at the age of 79, she had become the embodiment of the kingdom itself and of its loss. For weeks after her funeral, strange events were recorded in the islands. Volcanoes erupted, and the seas turned an odd hue from the sudden appearance of a multitude of red fish. It was as if the elements recognized that the kingdom was no more.
Colonization is something that has occurred in our history, especially the US history, for a very long time, and also colonization from other countries to other locations of the world. It is something that occurs. We're seeing it right now with other countries. Some people are saying, this is some way of colonization from individual as corporates, whatever. When we look at the ancient history of the indigenous Hawaiian population and the rules of the energy, the history is very telling. Maui was basically stolen land. California was stolen land. So we have to remember that the Polynesians were actually the first ones to really, I guess you could say, create the energy of being settlers in Maui. And that occurred about 1,500 years ago, and they brought like navigation, agricultural, and cultural traditions to Maui. It is seen as the energy that kind of really took place in how Maui became what Maui is today, the first area of culture. They had the area of influence such as sustainable agriculture and aquacultural ponds, and they also had taro farming and fish ponds. So there is a long, extensive history of Maui, of many foreigners arriving, the Western contact, which occurred when British explorer Captain James Cook arrived in Hawaii in 1778, marking the beginning of extensive Western contact. So European and American traders and missionaries have always been, I guess you could say, drawn to Maui, drawn to the area of the island. And right around the 1820s, there was this huge disrupt energy of Maui's native cultures as the introduction of Christianity by the missionaries occurred. And a lot of this basically, I guess, changed and transformed the Hawaiian beliefs and practices, where more people became centered around the churches instead of the energy of the elements and the elements of the gods and the deities. So the Western influence definitely occurred in Maui. And also, one of the big movements that occurred was known as the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, which occurred in 1893. So, in 1893, a group of American and European businessmen, with support of the U.S. government, overthrew the Queen, Liliuokalani, the last known monarchy of Hawaii. It was known as the coup. They were called the coup, a largely motivated by economic interest to somehow protect the sugar industry. And the sugar industry was something that Maui was very popular for. It was basically the root of sugar came from Maui, the sugar root or sugar cane. And the sugar industry and production was first sought off in Maui. And they did this annexation despite the opposition of the Hawaiian natives. The Hawaii was annexed by the United States in 1898 through the New Lands Resolution by passing a formal treaty. Hawaii became a U.S. territory in 1959 and was admitted as the 50th state of the U.S. control. So, unfortunately, they basically made the queen give up her rights, and they stole the land. I don't know else how to put it. It's stolen land. And I would think that the land gods would be extremely mad. The spirits, the entities, the energies of the land. Whenever land is stolen, it just doesn't sit right with the energy of karmic movement. So the impacts that Hawaii and Maui has definitely implanted has been seen for quite some time. The tourist industry. Maui's economic shift in agriculture to tourism in the 20th century, with the islands marked as the tropical paradise. So I will say that a lot of controversy on should the inlanders be moving to Maui is definitely a controversial topic. Land ownership. Large swaths of Maui's land remains under control of corporations and wealthy non-residents and private developers. So people who actually don't live there own the majority of the land. Native Hawaiians often face housing insecurities, high cost of living, and limited access to their ancestral lands. The resistance of sovereignty moments, basically freedom. Many Native Hawaiians continue to advocate for the restoration of Hawaiians' freedom, the Hawaiian sovereignty, the land's rights. Movements like Protect, Manu Kia, and the resistance of overdevelopment, such as construction of many more luxurious resorts on the sacred land, especially the sacred beaches. So there's definitely a lot of controversy about the fires, and I can see why, because all of the backstory that Maui has. So another energy of a stolen land is California. And yes, California.
The United States took half of Mexico's territory as follows. In 1836, Texas broke away from Mexico and existed as an independent nation, before being annexed by the United States in 1845. This annexation heightened tensions between the two nations because Mexico still considered Texas part of its territory. For the United States, after annexing Texas, President James K. Polk aimed to expand the nation's territory to the Pacific coast. The U.S. negotiated with Mexico to purchase two regions, California and New Mexico. However, Mexico refused. After negotiations failed in 1846, President Polk decided to deploy the military into the disputed territory between the U.S. and Mexico. With superior military strength, the U.S. captured Mexico's capital in 1847. By February 1848, Mexico was forced to sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Under this treaty, Mexico ceded a vast area of land to the U.S. in exchange
Through
for $15 million.
colonization and conquest, was first taken by Spain, and then by Mexico, and then finally by the United States. Of course, the indigenous people were here first. The tribes and the groups of the indigenous practices before the Spaniards came, which would have been probably, I believe, the Aztecs or like the Mayans, but there was definitely many indigenous cultures that lived within California and native populations that still are suffering from the stolen land that the U.S. and the Spaniards took back in many, many years ago. So California's indigenous populations, before colonization, there was native populations here. Before the European contact, California was home to one of the densest and most diverse indigenous populations in North America, with over 100 tribes and over 300 distinctive languages. There is a sustainable practice that native tribes like Chushamash, Tungava, and Miwok and Ohlone manage the land sustainability, practicing controlled burns, fishing, and acorn harvesting. The spiritual connection with California and the natives has always ran very deep. The spiritual connection to the land was central to the indigenous culture and spirituality as livelihood, with no concept of private property as being introduced until the colonizers came. The Spanish colonization occurred in 1769 to 1821, where starting with the Spanish missionaries from Juniper Serrera and established a chain of 21 missions along California's coast. The mission system sought to convert Native Americans to Christianity and to integrate their colonization. The impact on the Native Americans and Native people were forcibly relocated, enslaved, and stripped from their cultural practices. Diseases like as smallpox, measles, brought on by the Europeans, basically were one of the things that helped took out the indigenous population. There was a lot of resistance, and the natives often would try to fight back, but it was just too much of the colonizers because a lot of the natives were getting sick. Land seizure was something that occurred during this time. So a land seizure was basically when indigenous population had their lands and it was claimed like, this is my land, this is mine, was seized by the Spanish crown and then redistributed to settlers and to missions. Native Americans were displaced from their ancestral lands, disrupting their way of life. Then around 1821 to 1848 was the Mexican era. This is when Mexico gained independence from Spain in 1821. So we have to remember that the first colonizers were the Spanish from Spain. Then Mexico, who originally were the indigenous population, then they began mixed creating Mexicans. Mix is basically what Mexican means. It's a mix of the indigenous with the Spaniards. Then the Mexicans gained their independence from Spain in 1821, and California became a part of Mexican territory. The mission's lands were secularized in 1830, and a large land grants known as ranchos were given to the Mexican citizens, including some of the California elites, which were known as Mexican landowners. So almost like this huge small group of Mexican landowners did get some of these ranches and were able to create wealth. But there was a disposition for the indigenous population. Despite the end of the mission system, the Native Americans were not returned their land. So, for instance, if you were a native, your land got stolen by the Spaniard. But instead of the Spaniard, when Mexico became its own independent country or nation, despite the Spaniard or Mexico giving it back to the indigenous population, they gave it to the Mexicans. So the indigenous populations were still displaced. They were often forced into labor for the ranchers, which were basically the Mexican Spaniards, and were marginalized entirely. So a lot of the indigenous population then became more of a mixed race with the Mexicans and the Spaniards. Back in 1848, the U.S. could not let this occur. They said, you know what, we're the colonizers and we're going to go get that fucking land, because now that Mexico has won it, we're going to say no, no, no. So then that started the Mexican-American War. The United States invaded Mexico in 1846, and the conflict fueled by the belief in the manifest of destiny, the idea that Americans were destined to expand westward. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 is what ended the war. So basically what happened is California was in some ways sold from Mexico, and much of the Southwest as well, which was Texas, because Texas was first independent. So then Texas and also New Mexico were sold to the United States. And then that's how California, but I believe it was only for 15 million. And a lot of people believe that it was a very forceful soul. It wasn't something that was because Mexico wanted to sell. They just were losing at that time, that was their only option. And then we had the gold rush in around 1848 to 1855. The discovery of gold in California attracted tens and thousands of settlers, leading to further displacement of the native people. So more of the indigenous and also the native, who were first probably traditional Mexicans, were then displaced as more settlers for the gold rush came in. Violence against Native Americans, including massacres, enslavement, and forced retaliations, occurred within the state, especially in the gold rush country. We also have to remember that there was a lot of statehood and Native genocide in California in 1850. California became a state under the U.S., solidifying the legal framework for seizure of land. Native Americans were denied citizenships and basic rights, and their land was taken from them legal and illegally. Meaning, legally, they probably just gave them some money to get them out of here. And illegally, probably they didn't give them anything. California's genocide on Native people is pretty pretty predominant. The Native people have been basically, I guess you could say, in some ways, eliminated through massacres. The state government sanctioned violence against Native Americans, offering bounties for their scalps and funding militants to carry it out during many massacres in California. From 1848 to 1870, the Native population of California dropped from an estimated 150,000 to fewer than 30,000 due to the violence and displacement and disease brought on by the settlers. The modern area of implications that all this brings down is land ownership in California. Much of California's land is still owned by private individuals, corporations, or the government, with the native tribes having little access to their ancestral territories. Federally recognized tribes have regained small portions of land from reservations, but these have often lacked resources or are a fraction of what is originally theirs, and the cultural area of indigenous languages, traditions, and heritages have been wiped out from the state of California. The representation of the land back movements. The land back movement advocates for the return of stolen land to the indigenous people, along with sovereignty and reparations. Some progress has made in recent years. Certain lands have been returned to native tribes, such as in the year of 2020, the return of coastal land to the Esalen tribe. So yes, California is very much a stolen land. When we look at some of the native practices that we have learned about or that we have been taught through ancestral lineage, we have to remember that fire is a very dominant practice. Fire symbolizes transformation, passion, destruction, renewal, and energy. It is both a destructive force, also a life-giving one, linked to inspiration, courage, and purification. The fire gods and deities run through many cultures. The area is seen throughout multiple cultures. In Hawaii's culture, Pele, the goddess of the volcanoes and fires, Pele is both the creator and the destroyer, shaping the Hawaiian Islands through her eruptions. In Hinduism, Agni, the Vedic god of fire, Agni is the messenger between the human and the divine realms, symbolizing purification and sacrificial flame. In the Yoruba religion, Shagano, the god of thunder, lightning, the fire within us. Shagu is the powerful Orisha, known for her fiery temper and protection of her followers. The area of fire and the energy of air is something that played through with these fires. I often think something just doesn't sit right with me when I heard about the two fires. And this is mostly my opinion versus what has been told. This is basically my opinion. I think in some ways they are planning, I don't know who, but we have to remember that there's a lot of displacement of not just the natives of California who are wealthy, but there's also a lot of displacement of the Black and the brown population. We have to remember that LA came with a lot of diversity, and I often think that California is getting so overly populated that they might seize this as an opportunity to shift where the collective lays, where the collective is. especially if like you were renting. I could see how it could be tremendously hard to stay in that location because the prices are probably going to be extremely high if they do rebuild and what it is that they rebuild. Depending on who actually owns the land, I can see how they can definitely try to shift the culture and shift the dialogue of the community that LA has. They could make it more where it's corporations, restaurants, hotels, and not necessarily homes. We don't know. It's going to be very interesting what takes place, but it's very sad. And I'm going to put some links in my show notes for people to donate if they want to donate. There's many places that are having donation centers for the people in California, and then also we could probably still donate to a lot of organizations in Maui as well. But this definitely is a life-changing event that occurred, and I just wanted to give some of my perspective on it, give some of the history that comes with it, and some of the energy that I've been feeling from it, and that I feel that the collective has been feeling as well. I want to thank everybody for listening to this podcast. Please comment, like, and subscribe. Thank you.